Hi. Hello, everybody. Welcome to Knock Knock Hi with the Glockenfleckens. I am Dr. Glockenflecken, also known as Will Flannery.
I am Lady Glockenflecken, also known as Kristen Flannery.
And we are really excited about this episode.
It's a really interesting one.
So we have the one and only Adam Rose. He's Deputy Director of Advocacy for Freedom of the Press Foundation.
Mm-hmm.
So we got in touch with each other because a lot of protests going on.
Yep.
No Kings, anti-ICE protests.
Mm-hmm.
But it was around injuries.
Yeah.
And I was talking about on social media, lots of eye injuries, people losing their eyes.
Yeah.
You know, just because something is like it's non-lethal force, well, that doesn't mean it's
Not
safe.
harmful.
It's not harmful. And so I was talking about it, and they reached out. We did like some Q&A stuff, and I was like, just come on the podcast. Let's just talk about all this stuff. And Adam is it's fascinating to hear his perspective. It's 20 years plus in journalism,
Mm-hmm.
and both on the legislative side and litigation to protect journalists
Mm-hmm.
who are just trying to work safely while covering these protests.
Right.
So his experience comes from the journalist side.
Right.
And we talked a lot about just what it's like in the thick of these protests when they turn,
Right.
when they become violent. And what are the methods that the police are using?
Mm-hmm.
How can people, both journalists and just the average person,
Protesters. Mm-hmm.
yeah, protect themselves?
Mm-hmm.
Um,
And most importantly, protect their eyes.
protect their eyes and exercise their First Amendment rights.
Yes.
Very important.
That was a joke that the eyes
What?
were the most important.
Oh.
You just took it for granted because you're just like, yeah, obviously.
Oh. Of course. Like that's the whole point here. We do talk a bit about eyes. I use the word sclopatary at one point. It's great. It's just overall fantastic conversation. I hope you guys enjoy it. Just really interesting from someone who's been, in this environment for a long time.
On the ground.
So let's jump into it, shall we?
All right.
All right, here he is, Adam Rose. Hey, Kristen, remember how you love eyelid mites now?
Mm-hmm. Sure.
Yeah. Well, there's a lot of confusion out there. I want to clear something up.
Okay.
All right. People think they can get eyelid mites from dogs and cats.
Can they?
No. These particular Demodex mites are specific to humans.
Okay.
So spread from dogs and cats is not expected. That's
So
a myth.
Can't get them from cuddling our poodle.
No. Demodex mites that cause blepharitis live on humans. Most adults already have them. They just usually don't cause problems. It's when they overgrow that they can lead to itchy, red, irritated eyelids. Those little collarettes.
Mm-hmm. The crusties at the base of the eyelashes.
Right.
And the good news is there's a prescription eye drop available for Demodex blepharitis.
That is great news. To learn more about eyelid health and Demodex blepharitis, visit miteslovelids.com. Again, that's miteslovelids.com to learn more. This ad is brought to you by Tarsus Pharmaceuticals.
Hey, Teacher Besties, I'm Andrea Forkham, and I am so excited to share with you that my book, They Never Taught Us That, is available right now. It is everything an experienced or first-year teacher needs to manage the chaos of the modern classroom, including some anecdotes to make you feel a little bit better. Because if there is a way that you can screw up, I've probably done it. It also has advice on how to build trust with families, how to manage grading and lesson plans and IEPs and everything else that they never went over in your teacher prep program. They Never Taught Us That is available everywhere right now.
All right, we're here with Adam Rose, Deputy Director of Advocacy for the Freedom of the Press Foundation. Thank you so much for joining us.
We're really thrilled to be here. I've been a fan of some of your work for many years, and really appreciate you shining your light on some issues that are really dear to my heart.
Oh, I appreciate that. But I have to ask you, since you said it,
I was going to say, he only said some of your work.
Yeah, your favorite character. You got to tell us. Like,
Jonathan, easily.
Nice.
All right.
But then I do like nephrology. That always is a favorite. I forgot to bring a salt container today.
Oh,
do you have a connection? Is someone in your family a nephrologist, or just the character itself won you over?
Any doctors in your family?
No, sort of the opposite. Medicine is the one field my family has really very few ties to, but my family has benefited from incredible work by a lot of great physicians and surgeons over the years. So I got to be exposed as a caregiver. And what was really amazing kind of coming out of the pandemic, I'd had a lot of family that had some very serious issues. And so to see the humor in those situations was actually a really helpful way for me to sort of process what I'd been through. But it was also
Oh, I
just
love that.
funny, and I was told by your producer to spend a week studying the Krebs cycle before coming on, and that it would not be a waste of time.
So yeah, what is your favorite thing about alpha ketoglutarase dehydrogenase? Is
The
it
fact that
How
you
fun
can
it
say
is
it
to
and I don't
say.
have to.
Yeah.
perfect? We'll get into pyruvate later.
Great.
So tell us just about the Freedom of the Press Foundation. So what exactly is this? What is it that you do? The scope of the work?
So we're a nonprofit organization that was founded, I've been there over a year, but I think maybe 10, 12 years ago. And folks may be familiar with the Electronic Frontiers Foundation. And so a number of people connected with that, Trevor Tim among them, helped spin out this wonderful organization. My background's in journalism, and so I've benefited from their work for many years. And really their focus is to try and help prevent problems with journalistic access across the country, to really defend the rights of journalists, as well as whistleblowers. So people like Daniel Ellsberg, who people may know from the Pentagon Papers, and arguably the most famous whistleblower in history. He was one of the founding board members of the organization. Got some really interesting people: John Cusack, Edward Snowden. It's a fascinating board. And a number of different areas that we actually work in. So my particular role is advocacy, of course. And so I'm focused on things like how journalists can be at a protest safely and not get arrested. But we also have teams like the U.S. Press Freedom Tracker, which is a publication that reports on all of these things like a news outlet itself. And we also have an engineering team which does things like a program called SecureDrop, which many of the top newsrooms in the country use to get whistleblower information in terms of documents, PDFs, things like that. So if anyone out there is in medicine and needs to ever blow the whistle, I hope you aren't in that situation. But if you are, our team is the one that likely made the software that you would use to anonymously and securely provide information to journalists at many of the top newsrooms in the country. So all those different
always
pieces
wondered
working
how that
together.
worked.
Yeah.
You know,
Do
like
you just type
cryptography.
into a browser?
it's cryptography. Yeah.
Well, so it's
Yeah.
called SecureDrop, and the newsroom has to have it set up in advance. The team is constantly working to streamline it, because right now you need like 2 computers in the newsroom. They have air-gapped systems, where you literally transfer things over. It's very it feels cloak and daggery in an engineering sense. But at the end of the day, it involves cryptography, things that are like the Krebs cycle, a little bit beyond me. But still, we have people who are able to test those, make sure that they work effectively, and hopefully get information to where it needs to be properly vetted, and take a sincere and
Right.
earnest approach at figuring out how we as a community and as a country tell these important civic stories.
When I think about whistleblowers, usually when it comes on my radar, it's like some doctor is started committing fraud in a particular way, and it's like, you hear about a whistleblower, somebody from within the office who has decided to come forward, and I guess there's got to be protections for that person, and I think you actually there's like financial reward that you can. There's like these whistleblower.
Qui Tam, I think it's called.
Yeah, like there's a name for it. Yeah, where like if let's say, and this is beyond the scope of really what we're here to talk about today. I just think it's interesting, hearing about whistleblowers, in that if whoever you're whistleblowing on, like if it's been found that person, like, I don't know, defrauded the federal government of, like, we'll say like $20 million. I think you can, like, actually some of that money will go to the whistleblower or something like that. Like there's it's like built in kind of
Does that sound
financial
right to you, Adam?
reward.
100% right. It depends how you do it, though. So I'm not a lawyer. I can't practice medicine or law, but I
Right.
am around these fields a good amount. So yeah, a qui tam lawsuit is all handled through your attorney. So you would be very careful about that. You can be kept anonymous in those lawsuits, but you would need to talk to a lawyer if you're ever in that situation.
Yeah.
Don't just take the word on a podcast about this.
Right. No,
Yeah.
yeah.
But they do usually provide some sort of monetary reward, and it's actually sometimes a very large percentage. I mean, I've seen ones that are millions of dollars, which is really impressive, and it rewards whistleblowing. And because there's a judicial process, it also prevents abuse of that, because it's not like they just give that away willy nilly and they punish the person accused. There's a whole process for them to defend themselves. Big difference, though, of course, with journalism, right? And that's sometimes where people turn when they don't have anywhere else to go, where maybe things have been held up or are in places where their life might even be at risk. I mean, we think about international whistleblowing as well, and quite simply, quite frankly, people's lives can be on the line in these situations. So sometimes that anonymity and the filtering through a
Sure.
third-party journalist provides great opportunities to do the right thing, but also do it safely.
Well, let's talk about protests.
Yeah.
Because that's actually what brought us together here is there's been anti-ICE protests. There have been the No Kings rallies protests that have been happening recently, and so it's been in the news. And every so often there's violence that erupts at these
It's
protests.
tragic.
And I, when it comes to me, and I get tagged a lot on social media is when I hear about people having eye injuries or at least wanting to protect their eyes, or there's videos of an entire can of pepper spray being emptied into a protester's face. And it's like, look at this, Dr. Glockenflecken. What should we do to protect ourselves from something like this? And this it seems to be happening more and more frequently. And just to put more context behind the conversation we're about to have, there at a No Kings protest, there was this California college student, Tucker Collins, who lost his eye. He was just there to document I think he was there as a protester, but also just to document.
He actually wasn't even there to protest.
He wasn't there, but yeah, it was just documentation.
18-year-old USC student, lives downtown Los Angeles, and had been documenting, life in downtown LA, including protests for several months with a relatively new camera. Aeronautical engineering student on the rocket team at USC, and now, of course, only has one eye, and that is a field where you do need that, usually both eyes, to be able to deal with rocket science. Cinema minor. And so he had gone out, doing this other thing that he loves and documenting. And I mean, I've seen the video of it happening. I was actually a few minutes late to showing up exactly as it happened. Missed that exact incident. But the whole day actually kept proceeding at No Kings 3. And a lot of people got tear gas. I got some myself. I was coughing for a couple of days after that. But yeah, that's exactly, I mean, you really hit the nail on the head that it's the severity of these injuries, but also the escalation in frequency that we are seeing as people just try and go and express their opinions and exercise their rights.
Exactly. So everybody's going to these rallies, protests. Under the impression this is a nonviolent form of expressing your First Amendment rights, right? You want to show people what you think about this, whatever's happening, and you're not expecting it to be violent. And so, can you help us as someone who knows what it's like for journalists? I'd say a lot of people who are listening to this, maybe they've been to a protest, maybe they haven't, maybe they've been to a protest, but it was the police weren't involved, or it was an actual nonviolent protest. But from your perspective, take us into a protest and how it can progress to this point where people are having eye injuries, people are getting concussions, there's tear gas. What's the environment like that leads to that point?
Well, I first want to give people an assurance, but also sort of their own risk tolerance question. I think it was, I just saw the other day, you had a clip with Dr. Mike talking about LASIK. And, the percentages are really good, but there's always that really concrete risk. So I don't want to scare people into not exercising their rights. And lawyers call that chilling of your rights when you're scared from doing what you're legally allowed to do. So I don't want to make it sound like everything is chaotic and terrible and dangerous, because the overwhelming majority of these are, grandmothers and, fourth graders and people with hand-painted signs and walking their dog along with the protest with the dog with the sign, right? It's
people wearing frog costumes if you're in Portland.
Yes, that's what that's exactly what I am used to seeing at a protest. I can't, personally, I've never been to one where it was anything other than that.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, Portland, keep Portland weird, right? That is the theme. And we have adopted that down here in Los Angeles. We have had people in costumes recently, but I think Portland's been leading the way for sure. Well, so, most of this, again, if you go to one of these 10:30 in the morning protests in a suburb, I think most likely you're going to be fine. There's two general types of situations that get what the journalists tend to call spicy. And for a long time, I thought they meant that more metaphorically until I actually experienced that at No Kings 3 and was like, oh no, the air is literally spicy. It's this overwhelming sense, and people are running away from it for good reason. Journalists, of course, tend to come in with safety gear, PPE, and some protesters now do as well. But of these two situations where it really goes sideways, one tends to be when there is an impromptu, spontaneous response to, let's say, immigration enforcement, and that is increasingly common in this country, where community members will rush out in the street and they're speaking out, and I never see the protesters create any of the violence, but you do see officers respond with violence. And so sometimes people have been hit by cars, people have been shot with. There's a broad category that people will tend to call rubber bullets. Technically not the right term. It's something they used in Ireland, Northern Ireland back in the day. It's been used in the Middle East. In this country, we use foam rounds, which are also life-changing injury potential munitions. Again, the lost eyes and things like that.
Is that what you said, foam?
Very dense foam, foam rounds.
Wow,
and they tend to be shot out of either a 37 or a 40 millimeter launcher, so much, much larger than a typical lead bullet. Rubber bullets traditionally were literally pieces of metal coated in rubber. These still have a very serious impact. They can have muzzle velocities of several hundred feet per second when they come out of that launcher. So it all goes down a tangent, which I'm happy to dig into, but let me just explain for people, thinking about coming to these protests. So that first situation is the spontaneous one, and we've seen a lot of just terrible things of those.
So that's like an event happens, something happens, and everybody rushes into the street and just
shows up at somebody's house, and the neighbors come out.
It's not planned ahead of time. It just happens. That's what you're talking about.
That's exactly right. And they have every right to do it.
Right.
We have permits for protests in a lot of parts of this country, but you can go out in the street and express your opinion. You're in public. You're not allowed to interfere with the officers. And by the way, that's one of the ways that these things can turn violent, is that sometimes, on rare occasions, but it does happen, there will be protesters or agitators who will start to be violent, who will start to throw things. Sometimes you see these photos of protesters throwing tear gas, but where do you think they got it from, right? They're throwing it back to where it came from. They were shot with it, or shot at with it. But then there's this other category that folks should be very cognizant of, because again, they have every right to do it, but they need to kind of think about the risk calculus, which is the detention centers for ICE have been a real focal point. And throughout the history of this country, you have other focal points, right? Go back to the Civil Rights Movement, go back to the Revolutionary War, right? There are planned focal points for certain protests, the Boston Tea Party. But we know that there are certain facilities, whether that's Broadview outside of Chicago, whether that's Whipple in Minneapolis, whether that's the MDC in Los Angeles. I think I forget the Portland one. I want to say it's Lakeshore or something like that. It's a little south of the city, on the waterfront there. And, so there are these areas that tend to really draw the most attention. And so in addition to the typical peaceful protesters, and in addition to people who are really what I would call dedicated protesters, right? There's no magic funding I think they're getting. There is not some billionaire writing checks for them. And I think they would be very happy if there was. I think people are just really serious about these issues, and some literally 24/7 have protest encampments set up. At those situations, often when things are maybe longer in the day, like a No Kings protest, where you've had hours of peaceful protests, someone may come along and start to be violent. And out of hundreds of people, it might be 2 or 3. I personally witnessed this during the No Kings 3 protest in Los Angeles, where someone came and dropped a concrete bollard that someone had knocked down and threw it on the ground, and it was shattered in a bunch of chunks of concrete. And a couple people were hurling it over the fence towards, federal officers. Not a good idea, right? Federal officers can defend themselves, and I don't condone any violence on any side. But the scary part is what we've seen is this overwhelming response. And in both these situations where there's spontaneous protests in response to something, and in these more targeted geographic locations, law enforcement, whether that's federal or sometimes even local agencies, will respond with this whole suite of what we call less lethal munitions, which is really euphemistic. I mean, these can cause brain injuries, lost eyeballs, broken ribs, all sorts of really gross stuff. A radio reporter a few years ago in Los Angeles got hit in the throat, and he recovered, but the fillings got knocked out of his teeth. And it gives you a sense of just how viscerally dangerous these things are.
It doesn't take also a lot of force against the eye to cause irreparable damage to the eye. So yeah, just because something's non-lethal doesn't mean it's non-morbid. Like there's not some effects from that can really impact someone's life.
You mentioned Tucker Collins earlier, who lost his eye a couple of weeks ago. There's another photographer, also a young man in his 20s, named Marshall Woodruff here in Los Angeles. And this was No Kings 1. And in this case, it was the Los Angeles Police Department. And they hit him, I guess, in the cheek somewhere. And my understanding from his lawyer is that it literally burst his eyeball. And so it wasn't a direct impact, but it was the proximity and whatever the force was enough to cause that life-altering injury. So these are the situations that you want to avoid. But sometimes the situations come up on you, right? The protests can move, the law enforcement can move. And while we'd like to think that law enforcement can, give dispersal orders, one of the things with, say, the Los Angeles Police Department, I've been telling them for many years, because I advocate for press, but I can also make observations for everyone. You can't hear the dispersal orders because it'll come from, let's say, a helicopter, and the rotor blades will drown out the sound. Or, as I experienced, I was standing next to a guy playing bagpipes. So I have all this, all these live stream feeds, and you can actually go back to them, and you see the people playing drums, and that was overwhelming. There were people on speakers chanting. There were people playing music on speakers, and the dang bagpiper, it was ear splitting, right? I mean, it's funny, right? Because it's like it's surreal. Right. But then also you realize that this is reality. And so the law enforcement in that situation did try and issue orders. This was after Tucker was injured. LAP, that was DHS that shot him. And they shot him with a pepper ball, I believe, which is basically a lot of pepper powder. It can be synthetic or it can actually be OC, which is like what you put in your tapatio or Cholula, or what you put in your food with that. But it's incredibly concentrated. I mean, many, many times. And so that pepper ball is kind of like a paintball. Anyway, so those dispersal orders, they get drowned out and you may not realize. And I was observing, and because I'm press, I was exempt from the dispersal orders, or I was there as press that day. And as I'm watching inside what they call a kettle, which is where police form a cordon and they hold everyone as they're planning to arrest them. So a few dozen people were in there. As they were holding people and not allowing them to leave because they were about to all be arrested, that's when the alerts went out to everyone's phone saying, this is a dispersal order, leave the area. Well, it's too late. And so that's where it can really go sideways. So, a lot of common sense will keep people safe, but also they have every right to be there and to express their airing of grievances against, what is literally a place where people are being held against their will who often have not committed any crime. These are the detention centers people go.
So a lot of the protesters and the press, I mean, you can find yourself in a situation where you don't hear any of the warnings.
Correct.
And all of a sudden, it's just like tear gas, pepper spray. People are getting hit with pepper balls or whatever it is. And you just had, like, out of nowhere, they had no idea this was coming. Because of just all the extraneous noise happening around you.
Well, the noise prevents your ability to hear what may be dispersal orders. And again, the ones that go to phones sometimes come slow, or because of all the number of people there and the chaos, the cell systems may be jammed up. I've for years been telling law enforcement, like, hey, have signs, and maybe that'll become a target for the knuckleheads who are throwing bricks or concrete or whatever. But all right, at least you're moving that away and you're warning people to get out of there. I don't think that most law enforcement just starts shooting, but we also know there are occasions where they do, and we've caught this on video. And so that's actually a big part of my job, is to investigate and find the evidence, whether it's posted on social media, whether it's interviewing these people. It's what my colleagues at the U.S. Press Freedom Tracker do as well. And so we've identified hundreds of incidents where law enforcement was breaking the law. One day in Los Angeles, just to give you an example, I think it was No Kings 1, but it was around that period where there were a lot of protests. In a single day, and by the way, they have to file reports after each use of these munitions. That was actually part of a law that I lobbied for. One day, over 1,000 rounds were shot into crowds. So they can say, and they often do say on the police side of this, well, hey, we had a real violent threat, right? Someone was throwing water bottles. Well, I always go, how do you reload a water bottle, right? It's still a threat. But then when you shoot 1,000 rounds in a day, that's sort of wholesale violence, right? That's a blanket response. And whether that's pepper balls or foam rounds or tear gas or pepper spray, or there's something they call FN-303, which is like a pepper ball, except it can also carry a paint payload so that you can mark a suspect. All of these things are being fired at such high numbers that it's unrealistic to think that it's actually targeted against an active threat. It really seems to be used illegally. And when I say illegally, the laws here in California and similar, I think, in certain other parts of the country, are that you cannot move a crowd using these munitions, right? You're absolutely, I mean, look, I would rather they use an LLM than a gun
Yeah.
if someone is actually a dangerous threat, right? We're not being unrealistic about all of this, but we've also documented the evidence by the hundreds of incidents. And so that's why for protesters, for anyone exercising their rights, you have to be concerned about that these days.
Wow.
That's a lot to take in.
It
I'm
is.
just
Yeah,
like
sorry, this-
processing all of this.
I didn't realize there
Wow.
were so many different ways of trying to
Yeah.
control the crowds, that officers can use, or that have all the different types of non-lethal munitions
Yeah.
is kind of overwhelming to hear about, and then having to get emergency services in for these people is probably also sometimes challenging,
Yeah.
Yeah,
And
very, very much
just
so.
because they're less lethal, like, do they have to be so, I don't know, what morbid is the term you used?
Well, just
Medically?
right. I mean,
Are they going overboard with the munitions themselves? Like, is that really necessary to disperse people?
I don't think that it is. I think that if they were able to get the warnings out, you would have a much more cooperative crowd overall. Again, it's not to say that they never ever need them, but they've abused them. And I pick
Yeah.
on LAPD because I live in Los Angeles, but this is not unique to Los Angeles.
Right.
Minnesota State Patrol had a lot of major problems back in 2020 during the BLM movement's peak. But to give you a sense of this, so there are a number of lawsuits in Los Angeles that are seeking injunctions. So these are court orders. I'm part of the LA Press Club, and so my organization has filed a couple of these. We won an injunction against DHS, including ICE and Border Patrol. We've also won against one against LAPD. We aren't asking for a penny in damages, right? Those all need to be handled by the victims who are injured. But what happened in one of these cases, it was a separate case. It wasn't one of ours. It was the Black Lives Matter case against LAPD. They got an injunction not to use these weapons on protesters, literally just asking them to follow the state law. And they kept violating it through this summer. And so the judge said, look, this is too dangerous. You're hurting too many people. You are now prohibited from using the 40 millimeter launchers, which I think tend to do the most damage and probably have caused the most losses of eyes in particular.
mm-hmm.
Days later, like 3 days later, they grabbed this other kind called an FN 303, which is just, it's all gobbledygook to most people, but they're just the different brand names. So they went from a 47 millimeter platform to an FN 303 platform. And it's, alleged, we're still confirming a lot of things, but it seems that one protester lost at least one eye. They may not have even been protesting. There's reports that they were just a bystander who went to visit a friend. But what's really, just exponentially worse is now I'm hearing from people close to that situation, and again, not confirmed, but that there is an infection related to that initial injury, and they may lose their other eye. And that is literally just being told, you can't use this, so they grab something else that does the same thing. It's like a really morbid toy chest.
Yeah, those types of injuries are always high risk of infection, because you can introduce, whenever there's foreign bodies involved, you can introduce all kinds of bacteria. Oftentimes, these injuries are happening in a less than clean, sterile environment. And so you can definitely introduce problems that can lead to, if not losing the eye right there with the injury,
Please no milk, right?
weeks
I think we've talked, we've emailed about that.
Yes.
That's exactly right. And so actually, let's take a break, and I want to come back and talk about like caring for these injuries specifically, and some of the social media content that I've made about it. All right, we're back with Adam Rose. So Adam, let's talk about these injuries in particular, because I've made a couple of videos. Usually, whenever there's a lot of protesting happening in the news, or there's footage of somebody being having eye injuries, or I'll say something about how to protect your eyes, and it's pretty basic stuff. I mean, for an ophthalmologist, it's basic. It's just wearing eye protection, I think, and that's something that anybody who goes to a protest, you should have with you. I would recommend that anybody, even if it's like
Well,
you
you
said,
would recommend everyone have it at all times.
right. I think you should wear eye protection when you're brushing your teeth, but that's about more about me than anybody else. But even like you say, there's like I don't want to put a percentage on it, but a very, very low chance, right, that anything's going to turn violent. It's just not. It's just worst case
Better safe than
scenario,
sorry.
preparation, go to Home Depot, get yourself a $5 pair of safety glasses, and they're very fashionable these days, by the way. So it's,
But I have a question about that, because he's talking about things that use force in addition to chemicals. So if you have safety goggles on and you get hit, at these high speeds, obviously better than hitting your eyeball, but then what?
Right. There are some things some materials are better than others.
Mm-hmm.
Like polycarbonate material is extremely hard, and is less likely to shatter. And so, you hope that whatever safety equipment you have on will protect against a direct force from a high speed projectile.
But I'm thinking it hurts when I accidentally knock my glasses against my face. So to get shot in.
What you're trying to avoid is a direct hit to the squishy part.
Yes.
The eye.
Sure.
You have an orbital rim.
Yeah.
That's going to take a lot of the blunt force trauma that you might get an orbital fracture, but if you don't have a direct hit, or your glasses maybe get pushed back into your face.
Eye, yeah.
But they're hitting your orbital rim. They're hitting the bones around the eye. And so that alone is going to protect you. What you don't want is a direct pressure from a projectile right on the eyeball. That's when we see the most devastating injuries.
Yeah.
And you can have open globe injuries. You have something called sclopataria, which is probably, Adam, what you mentioned earlier, someone that maybe had a shot to the cheek that caused an open globe injury. Well, there's something called a traumatic injury that you see in military situations, like you see in war. These are wartime injuries where you have basically a shock wave from some projectile that will damage the area around the path of that projectile just from the shock wave of it. And so we see that in really severe eye trauma. So safety glasses, although it's a possibility it may not work, it's such an easy thing to do to just protect yourself.
Do they make some that if not, this feels like an opportunity for somebody out there that are that absorb shock, so that if you're hit in the face? Do you know, Adam? Have you seen anything?
Yeah, so I can speak to what's on the market. I can't speak to any of the medical safety, and I think, you explained this really well. So, first, just a reminder that when you're going out there, and if you are concerned you'll be in one of these situations, you're really trying to mitigate against two types of threats. There's the chemical agents, and there's the kinetic impact projectiles, KIPs. So one of the wild things, you mentioned military, there are international conventions, which the U.S. is party to, which prohibit the use of these chemical weapons in warfare. You can't use them against another country's soldiers. But there's an exemption within that to allow use in domestic crowd control situations.
Well, that doesn't make any sense.
No.
Yeah, really, really disconcerting. But that is the reality.
I'm actually shocked to hear that.
Yeah, you can use them on your citizens, but not somebody else's soldiers.
Okay.
All right. It's really disturbing. The second issue are the kinetic impact projectiles, and just the ballistics created by anything else shattering. And so it's actually the military standards that we often look to. So, I don't know as much about the absorption specifically, but there are shatter resistance standards that folks should be aware of. And it's crazy to think that you have to jot down this information if you're trying to go to a protest, or this is what you look to buy online or at Home Depot or at Lowe's or wherever your nearest hardware store is. So the first standard that a lot of people look to is ANSI, which is an industrial standard. You probably, I don't know if it's used in medicine as much, but ANSI Z87 plus ratings are standard across industry, right? So for construction work, things like that. And it's very easy to find those in your average hardware store. However, this is really scary. So I am friends with folks at Crisis Ready Media, in particular, a gentleman there named Chris Post, and their team, which does professional training for newsrooms all around the country and the world, some of the top ones, household names. And because of the muzzle velocity of some of these munitions, they're saying even the ANSI ratings are not adequate enough because the ballistics could shatter and create shrapnel that might go in your eye. I'll be honest, we're all just doing our best here to figure this out. So this is not to say that, is ANSI better than nothing? I think a lot of people would take that risk, but it's a risk that you're taking, to be clear. Right. There is a higher rating called MIL-PRF, and then there's a whole bunch of numbers after it. But if you find goggles that say MIL-PRF rated, because there's a few different versions of it, those are literally what our military is using in, the Middle East and, all over the world, and, just in the training range at home. And that's the best rating that you can most likely find anywhere. And I think there's a version of those. I'm not endorsing any particular company, but I know one pair that I have and have used is made by Klein Tools. They're at almost every hardware store. They're MIL-PRF rated and ANSI rated, so they get the military and the industrial standard, tests. And this all comes down to when we look at these ratings for the science nerds out there, it's joules, and joules of impact, but they test them differently. So one test will be for if you're going to get hit in the face by a 2x4, if you're on a construction site, that's why you have the ANSI ratings. Where if you're going to get shot with a ballistic or something exploding and you have shrapnel, that's what the MIL-PRF ratings are for. And then you look at all the international ones. There's EU standards, there's New Zealand standards, Australia standards. And, all of these are a little bit different. So anything above ANSI, which is most of the international standards or the military US ones, that's really, really good. And so you can find these just for glasses, just for goggles. If you wear, actually, this might be something you can help folks think about. Have you ever had to do those kind of custom inserts? I know I've got some colleagues with them where they have special goggles and they have to get prescription lens inserts because I wear glasses.
Oh yeah.
It sucks wearing these things. I can't see unless and then I'm breaking the seal because of the stems. So what can people do if they do have a prescription in terms of getting something
that's
that
a good question.
That's actually a good question. One that I really haven't thought about because I do have patients that have prescription safety equipment, safety glasses. I'm not sure what materials allow for that to happen, specifically the ones you're talking about. So definitely something that I need to look into.
Yeah.
Yeah. But you
Good
can
thing to have handy if you have prescription.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, again, I've got my glasses right here, and to your point earlier, when I get hit in the face just wearing these, it hurts like hell. So it's,
I can't
it's a lot to
imagine
juggle.
getting shot with something.
And that also leads actually nicely into the other side of things, which is the chemical exposures, because that's probably what reaches a lot of people on social media the most are those chemical, because there's more potential for exposure. I would
And are
say.
they more common, or is it maybe like a first line of defense versus?
Oh, that's a good question. Like, would they do with the response from law enforcement? Does it typically start with a certain thing, or?
I think it really depends on the agency.
Okay.
Border Patrol is going to be different than LAPD is going to be different than Minnesota State Patrol.
Okay.
I think that what we have seen is a propensity for smoke and gas to be used first by federal agencies, as well as pepper balls. They much less frequently will use those kinetic impact projectiles, other than pepper balls, which are sort of 2-in-1. Like actually, pepper balls are supposed to be shot like off the ground or off the street sign, so it sprays and becomes aerosolized. Essentially, it's powder, but that's the idea. But they're shooting people directly with those. So it really could change depending on where you are and which agency is responding to the concerns.
So people might be thinking, oh well, why would I don't even need to bother getting prescription in a pair of safety glasses, because I'll just wear contacts and I'll wear my goggles over the contacts. But then you're setting yourself for a little bit more risk with the chemical exposures, especially if you don't have a good seal around your safety glasses. And so you could get tear gas, pepper spray, any of these things that explode into a cloud of mist into the eyes. And this is the one. Every time I talk about this on social media, it goes viral, I feel like, because people are looking for this type of
Is
information.
it that the contacts trap the
It
chemicals?
does, yeah. People think, I've had people think that contacts protect your eyes from these, and they don't at all, because your tears are underneath your contacts. Your contacts sit on your tear film, and so you don't want your contact directly glued to the surface of your eye.
Yeah.
You need to find new contacts if that's happening. And so, yes, anything that's in the air that's aerosolized will get underneath your contact lenses. And so you really want to, if possible, avoid wearing contacts to a protest for that reason. If you can, wear glasses. If you are wearing contacts and you do get an exposure to pepper spray, tear gas, you want to irrigate. And I'm sure Adam, you're taught, as journalists, I'm sure you said there's a company that comes in teaches you? Do you have people like me coming in and talking to you about this stuff, or like, where does the training lie in your world?
Well, so the press couldn't be more opposite than medicine, right? You go through all this training,
Right, yeah.
lawyers, the same thing, all this training. Journalism, it's one of two professions in the Constitution.
You're not talking about corneal anatomy in
No.
no, okay, all right.
No, it's literally, the clergy and the press are the two in the First Amendment that the government says, hey, we can't regulate you guys. Good luck. So we sort of have to do this as we go. Now, of course, there's wonderful journalism schools where students are taught things. A lot of workplaces and labor unions for journalists do a lot of work on this. And wonderful nonprofits, not just my own Freedom of the Press Foundation, but Reporters Without Borders and their USA group in particular, Committee to Protect Journalists, Reporters Committee for Freedom of the Press, Society of Professional Journalists. There are dozens of really fantastic groups. I would be remiss not to mention the National Press Photographers Association. And so some of them do training. Many of them have conferences where you can get training. Chris Post is someone who is a real expert on training. He's a photographer who's been at many of these events. And so his organization is called Crisis Ready Media. They have both a nonprofit and a professional training part of that organization. And so a lot of it's picking it up on the fly, which means the first time someone goes out there, whether you're working for CNN, New York Times, or Fox News, or whether you're, an independent, blogger, TikToker, Instagrammer, you run a medical, series on all of these platforms. If you go out there to cover this, you have every right to do so under the First Amendment. But are you going to be prepared? And so, it's a risky situation for people who are not experienced in this. I think a lot of people learn from colleagues and mentorship out there as well.
Right, who've been in these situations. What would you personally bring with you?
Yeah, I don't go out every time because I'm not like normally on a beat that covers this. And in fact, my full-time focus is advocacy, but I still have a bit of that journalism streak in me after doing it for 20 years at all sorts of different outlets.
Yeah.
And so when I go out there, I'm still fine-tuning my own kit, but a respirator of some sort is always a top priority. So in the respirator space, unlike the goggles and the eyewear we are talking about, where you might have these sort of devil's choices between, well, is it going to let in, gas, or is it going to prevent, ballistics? With a respirator, anything is better than nothing. A damp cloth is going to be better than nothing. But, it's popularized, unfortunately, during the pandemic. N95 masks are really good. If you want to upgrade that, you've got P100. The P stands for petroleum, and that can be really good in those situations where you've got an aerosolized gas-based material in the air. So there's different varieties of those. You can get your ones for a few cents or $1 or something like that. Your basic KN95. You can also get these half-face respirators, which are really nice, and they screw on with different filters, so you can upgrade those as you go.
Yeah.
You can also get full face, which is really nice because they'll have little valves, and so it prevents fogging, which can be a real issue.
Mm-hmm.
I always remind people, by the way, if you're going out to do this for the first time, you don't want to be trying it on that day. You want to have already done a dress rehearsal to make sure that everything works together. You don't get fogging. That you know what to do if it does fog or fail in some way. So, it's not just you have it in your pocket or your backpack and you can go. So anyway, so the respirator, the eyewear, a helmet. I tend to wear just a basic construction helmet that's very discreet relative to other ones. Some people wear full ballistic helmets. And again, there's ratings. Like these are called 3A body armor that folks wear. I also tend to wear what they call a plate carrier without a plate. So a plate carrier is what you see a lot of these federal officers wearing, where it actually can hold these ballistic plates. I skip the ballistic plate because they're not using lead, right? They're not using live ammo. But it gives a little extra protection and it distributes weight really nicely so that I can have an extra camera, microphone, extra gear on me. I've got a medical kit on the back of it. And, this is not what the average person should need to bring to a protest, but I'm going specifically when I go to observe the worst of it, when police declare an unlawful assembly, when tear gas and foam rounds are being used. So I really kind of go over the top. And I'll just say that during No Kings 3, just as an example, it's so predictable sometimes for me because I've been following this for a while. And I don't say that as a good thing. The protests in Los Angeles in the downtown area started at 10:30 a.m. and they ended. They were supposed to end around 5:30, and so I went at 5 p.m. The last half hour that it was scheduled, knowing that that's when things would likely go wrong. And literally, as I mentioned, I missed the injury to Tucker Collins by a few minutes. But then I was walking up as that happened. when he was shot in the face with a pepper ball, all the tear gas was also released on the crowd. And as I was coming around the corner, it was almost like what Animal House with Kevin Bacon. A crowd of people starts running at me, tears streaming down their eyes, red faced, and I'm walking right into it. I'm going the wrong direction, salmon upstream here. And so I knew, right? I knew to start pulling on gear. And I because I'm testing different things right now, I brought the half face respirator goggles and I have the helmet on. And then I came around the corner, and that's when something got unseated, and that's when I choked down some of this gas. And so I start feeling the back of my throat like I just chugged some hot sauce. And I knew I couldn't get any closer without resetting. So I went around the corner, and I had a full face respirator, and that worked. So that allowed me to have the protection where I was able to breathe well. I had the protection against ballistics around my face to an EU standard with the one I was using. And made by a company called Mira, I think was the one I was wearing. It's very similar to the ones that the officers use. And so that's another risk, by the way, with all of this, is that sometimes people might think, unless you actually have a big label that says press, people might be like, well, wait, is that a cop? And that scares people in these situations because of the violence. Because the violence, even though it maybe is initiated by someone, knucklehead in the crowd, it's escalated by law enforcement. And so I've had other protests where I showed up already in gear. And people didn't know me who were part of this kind of 24/7 protest. And I knew LAPD was coming down, so I got all geared up. But then protesters started freaking out, and another journalist who knew them really well was able to tell them, no, he's cool. Don't worry. He's not here to cause you trouble. He just wants to watch. But I created a worse situation because I showed up early in this gear, and it escalated tensions, and it scared people.
Wow.
And so these are the things that journalists, much like doctors, thinking, first rule, do no harm. These are the things where we can actually make it worse. So, I'm always, and I don't go out a ton, but enough that I'm having to make these evaluations and rethink and readjust every single time.
In your medical kit, you mentioned a medical kit. Is there any kind of saline? Is there, name a couple of things you got in there.
Yeah, so it was the base kit is just like one of those things you can buy online that has a whole lot of stuff in it. So gauze and bandages and then alcohol wipes.
Aid. Yeah.
And then I add two things. One is a trauma pack, so if there's bleeding, that you can slap that on. I really am not the one who should do it, but often you find that there are these kind of street medics, right? These are people who might be RNs or people who might be ENTs, and so they
maybe even an ophthalmologist. Who knows?
Every once in a while, we might get an ophthalmologist.
Yeah.
So far, neurology and dermatology haven't come out, but
still is asking a little too much. So.
Yeah. Well, and then the one other item I bring, and again, I'm not endorsing anything. It's just something I've happen to use is something called Sudocon, which is made, I believe, by Byrna, which makes a lot of the weapons, actually, right? So they sell the problem and the solution.
Wow.
And it's these big wipes, like baby wipes, basically. And it's and you can make your own at home, but it's just convenient. It costs $1 or $2. And it's basically like Johnson's & Johnson baby shampoo, essentially, and sugar. And I don't know why sugar. Maybe you do, but so you're able to wipe off, but you don't want to rub, right? You could wipe off in maybe some skin areas, but avoid that on the eyes. You can also then squeeze it so it comes out in your eyes. And then that with any water is great. I've also used it to wipe off my gear when it's gotten covered. And it's because it's basically shampoo. It gets all over the place and everything's very sticky. But those are the things. So a basic kit, the trauma packs for bleeding and these Sudocon wipes. At the end of the day, I think you mentioned earlier irrigating, and that's sort of the main thing when people are just in a bind and nothing else, just water. We were talking before the break about milk, and all the time I hear people like, "Oh, milk," is kind of like you grow up learning.
How many years have you heard that?
Have milk,
you've been doing this 20 years. I bet you for 20 years you've been hearing like you should definitely use milk. No,
that's. Well, especially because in LA, people love to protest in the summer when it's hot. In downtown LA, it's 95 degrees. Do you really want to pour milk in your eyes? It's been out in 95-degree sun for 6 hours. Yeah, probably not a good idea.
And that's the danger with milk products. I hear not even that. Just like I've heard of like cream cheese and like cottage cheese, any kind of milk product.
Just smear it on.
And it's right. And so the idea behind it is you have, fats that can emulsify, some of the oils and more easily remove them from your eyes. But it has bacteria in it. And this is the issue.
And now people are using raw milk that has even more.
Exactly, right? So you're not only do you have the initial injury with we'll just say pepper spray, it can cause abrasions on your corneas. And when you have a corneal abrasion, much easier to develop a corneal infection, which can be devastating. And then so you're taking an eye that's already at risk for infection, and you're dumping a bunch of bacteria on it.
Yeah.
And there's other things you can use. Saline is great. Like that should be, if you have saline with you, perfect. All right, just
toss some contact
irrigate,
solution in that bag. Yeah.
As soon as, if you're wearing contacts, as soon as just do a quick irrigation, and then as soon as you're able to actually keep your eyes open, like get your contacts out, and then keep irrigating. And like you said, if you don't have saline, like water, just you got to irrigate your eyes, but don't use milk products that have been sitting in the heat for in 95-degree heat for a couple hours. That's probably the worst.
Don't eat
thing.
them either. Probably not a good idea.
Yeah. Definitely not. Well, one thing, and this is kind of the last topic I want to talk about. You mentioned earlier about your like investigative role that you've had previously about looking at footage, and I feel like now that everybody, just let's say like Tucker Collins, you could just grab his camera, all right, grab a phone, and be, I mean, not a professional journalist, but documenting it, right? And that's happening everywhere. And so now social media gets flooded with all these videos, and it's like starting right in the middle of the action. And so it's hard to know, like, what was the origin of this? Like, how did this start? And how, as a journalist, do you navigate this kind of thing? Because you got to be as accurate as you possibly can. And, everybody's trying to like pick a side, like who started it, who escalated it. And so how I imagine this has made your life as a journalist like quite a bit more difficult to try to navigate this issue with social media.
Well, yes and no. It has made things a lot easier by getting many different angles and different time codes, and you sync everything, right? I mean, we just when we started this, we synced it with the clap, right, to make sure the audio worked for this our conversation today. And it's a similar idea where retroactively, when you find enough evidence, enough different angles, you can start to pair it all together. And so, from a journalism and investigative perspective, it's always the basics of reaching out and trying to talk to people, get that perspective. Almost universally, police officers won't discuss these things. They open up investigations, and then it puts it into a personnel file for a year, and they can't talk about it, and so it's problematic. But I for years have basically pleaded with LAPD to give me video. Right? They'll say, "Well, we can't tell who's press, or someone's pretending to be press." And I go, "Okay, well, I've given you hundreds of examples where someone who was legitimately press, Pulitzer Prize winners, people from the LA Times, New York Times, AP, where they've all been assaulted or denied access." And give me one example from your thousands of body cam that are out there. Their frontline officers are all supposed to be wearing body cam. So give me one example. And a few years ago, they gave me one example where someone joked about it, but it was like clearly a joke. It was a performance piece of art, basically. And so I'm not saying that it doesn't ever happen that someone might do that, but I'm skeptical about the volume of all of it. But what's nice is that when you have live streamers out there, you're also able to then sync things up. And so things like I mentioned earlier with the inability to hear dispersal orders, it's one thing for me to say it or for me to have it on my body cam. It's another when I have 3 different feeds that I find that are all synchronized and able to show, well, if you go to 5:27 p.m. here, when the announcement seemed to be starting, maybe because there was a helicopter, but no way any of these people heard it, it shows, that's not audible. Similarly, when someone gets shot, from one angle, well, was there another threat? Unfortunately, like even when body cam gets released, because I've been involved in these lawsuits against police departments, and they'll release the body cam, and literally I've seen a police chief go to city council and then also the police commission and say, well, we have body cam footage that paints this in a totally different light. And many people, this is a great example. There's a journalist, Lauren Tomasi, that many people may have seen. She works for 9 News Australia, and this is in Los Angeles, and you see her talking to camera while she's doing a segment for her station or her network. And you see the LAPD officers talking to each other. They point seemingly right at her, and they shoot her in the back of the leg. And so for a long time, people were saying that was intentional. What the chief did was then go to city council and go to the police commission, which is his bosses, and say, well, the video shows something totally different. Well, because of the lawsuits, we are actually able to get their body cam video. First of all, they're covering their body cam, which is a little problematic, but you get the audio. And so when they were discussing, it's true. They weren't saying, oh, we're going to shoot the journalist, right? I mean, thank goodness they weren't saying that. But, someone had been throwing a bottle or something like that. What it instead informs us is that that's how reckless they're being with their shots. I think that was the day they fired 1,000 rounds. And so when they just start sort of wholesale shooting at general crowds, that's the inevitable result, is that it's the recklessness and carelessness. So having that additional video is really illustrative, right? It shows that, okay, well, this person shouldn't be punished on an officer discipline level for, intentionally targeting someone. But maybe they need some retraining. Maybe there's an issue here with how they're using these weapons. Maybe there's any number of other things that's not for me to judge. It's for the department itself to judge. But so far, I don't know that they have. Similarly, all these people on social media are creating enormous wealth of information, which, it takes a long time, and it takes me a lot of hours just watching it. I mean, it's not fun.
Sure.
I don't want to, but it also does feel like this is part of why people like me love journalism. As that investigation, it's rewarding and it's fulfilling to have that aha moment and to realize, okay, this is what happened. This is what caused this. This is what led to that. And so, to me, I started just taking that investigative journalism skill set and turning it back on my colleagues and investigating what happened to them. And along the way, when I could, also trying to help protesters, even though my advocacy is narrowly focused on press. So it's a fascinating new world with all of this. And whether someone is press, whether someone is just a bystander, I encourage people to keep filming in all these situations. And I always point to Darnella Frazier, who filmed the murder of George Floyd. And she was given a Pulitzer Prize, the highest honor in the industry in the US, not because she was a journalist, but because she committed an act of journalism. And that's such a critical distinction that we make, is that as journalists, we're not trying to say that journalists are special and we get special privileges and we're a special class of people. It's not about those nouns. It's about the verb. It's about the sacred acts of journalism, of documenting, of informing the public, of bearing witness. And so all of my advocacy is not to say that, well, someone has a press pass and they're special, because you don't need a press pass, by the way, from the government. And some agencies, only a handful still, but some still try and issue those. You do need indicia, and it's actually out of your hometown where that Ninth Circuit court ruling came from, that journalists need to have some indicia, whether that's large professional equipment or employer issued ID or something, business card, to show that they intend to commit this act of journalism. But, anyone, whether you're a TikToker or Instagrammer, if you were going out there not as a protester, but to bear witness, and you can bring something that shows, hey, here's your cell phone's going to break. But here's a printout that shows what I'm doing, or it shows I'm on an assignment, or my business license, or whatever it is. And so you can try and have that conversation during a calm moment, right? Not in the heat of the chaos, but to say like, hey, I'm just here doing my job, or I'm just here. And maybe it's a hobby, but my hobby is protected by the First Amendment, which is informing the public. I want to make it real clear to folks that, yes, if you're protesting and there's a dispersal order, you got to go. But if you're just documenting and informing the public, certainly in the Ninth Circuit, which is most of the West Coast here where we are, and again, literally started out of the 2020 Index Newspapers case in Portland. Legacy has continued now into the LA Press Club versus Nome, which is the DHS case, and the LA Press Club versus LAPD. Similar litigation has been done. We're kind of balkanized as a country now. So similar litigation has been pursued in Chicago with the Chicago Headline Club case. There's the Tincher case out in Minneapolis, and there's even a new one out of Oregon recently. So
I was going to ask you, what are the advocacy efforts? Like, what are you focused on now?
Yeah. Well, it's multifaceted. Part of it's litigation, but ultimately the law exists in two places. It exists in the courtrooms, of course, but it also exists in the street. And there's this really kind of chilling line that police agencies have used for many years called, you can beat the rap, but you can't beat the ride. So if you're a journalist and you're taken away in handcuffs, you can't sell your photos if you're a freelancer. You can't file your report if you're on staff somewhere. So the advocacy, is not just to get litigation, which I organize by finding the evidence and handing off to wonderful lawyers from all sorts of different law firms and a lot of ACLU chapters around the country. But then it's also about that street level advocacy, and it's about leaning on these departments to better inform their officers, to update training materials, to increase training hours. Those are things that are really important. It's also about informing people of their rights and how to best articulate them in the moment. Right, the last thing before the click of handcuffs usually is someone saying, "But I have a First Amendment right," and then it's just click. You're never going to win a philosophical argument on a skirmish line. And that's why I've also done legislative reform here in California, and we hope to see more throughout the country. And so in California law, which applies to there's 400 or 500 agencies in California, applies to every one of them, but it doesn't apply to the feds. We did that through the courts instead. But it says that press cannot be subject to dispersal orders when there's a protest, and that they can't be shot at with these munitions. So it's litigation, it's legislation, it's informing the press, it's informing the police departments. I don't want to paint it like there's some enemy adversarial relationship, because at the end of the day, these are all a type of first responder, right? We know first responders are cops, firefighters, doctors, paramedics, right? That everyone just reflexively knows. But journalists are also a form of a first responder, because when there's a disaster, a plane crash, a fire, a protest, it's going violent, they're running right at it. I was that salmon going upstream as people are fleeing, and I'm like, I got to get in the middle of this thing now. And I don't want to interfere, right? And the press should never interfere, with any of these, other first responders. But they are a first responder for information, and often we wouldn't know whether it's about this violence or even things like the Marines being deployed here in Los Angeles a few months ago. Literal constitutional crisis in our streets, and yet LA's big, right? 400 square mile city, 4,000 square mile county, more people than 40 states. So most people were watching Netflix on the couch. They were going to the farmer's market, right? They didn't know that we had a constitutional crisis down the street. It took the press being there. And so that's why we advocate for acts of journalism and to protect those people who are able to demonstrate that they're there to inform the public.
That's great. I love it. Exercising First Amendment rights, but also making sure you can go home safely afterwards. Like that's the goal, right? That we want for everybody. And just want to thank you so much for your time. This was enlightening, and I think a lot of good practical tips for people.
Yeah,
too.
definitely,
So
and interesting insights on something we don't usually get to see from that perspective.
So I know you're on Blue Sky, Adam Rose over on Blue Sky. Anything else you want people to know about? Where to find you? Or find information about the Freedom of Press Foundation?
Yeah, really easy website, freedom.press.
Oh, there you
That's
go.
it. Yeah. And so you can find us on most social media, Instagram, YouTube, Blue Sky, X. If it's a social media platform, we're probably on it, because we are also a bunch of journalists. We've got journalists, lawyers, engineers. So we love experimenting and playing with all those platforms. So if you just look up Freedom of the Press Foundation, follow us. You can spread informational resources that we have. That's one of the best things that folks can do. As you mentioned, I'm on Blue Sky as Adam Rose. I was hoping you weren't going to be disappointed. I'm not the guy in the blue cardigan named Adam Rose, nor am I the WWE wrestler.
The TikTok guy,
yeah, doppelnamers. That's right. not me.
You don't have the most unique name, I'll say.
No.
There's probably a good handful about it. Not like Dr. Glockenflecken. I think there might be only one of me. I'm not sure.
If there's another, I'm going to make sure to introduce you when I meet them.
Please do. Well, Adam, thanks again for coming on.
Thank you so much you've got a great spotlight here, and thanks for casting it on these great important issues.
What a fascinating job, insight. It's
the whole world that we're just not privy to usually.
Yeah, he scared me, because he before we recorded, he just sent me every story about someone with an injured eyeball at a protest. And I was like, oh my goodness.
Yeah.
Look at what a massive problem this is.
Right. I didn't realize there were so many.
Yeah. And so it's traumatic just getting emails from him.
Yeah.
Because I know who got injured now. It's but hearing his insight into and talking about all the protective measures you can take and is, I think, great to hear, and hopefully all of you appreciated that. Let us know what you think. You can email us knockknockhi@human-content.com. Visit us in our Human Content Podcast family on Instagram and TikTok @HumanContentPods. Thanks to all the listeners leaving feedback and reviews. We really appreciate that. If you subscribe and comment on your favorite podcasting app or over on YouTube @Glockenfleckens, by the way, we'll give you a shout out, @Pixality7902 on YouTube. Said, not a doctor, but glad you were talking about this. I was discussing med school admissions, applications, and looking at it holistically versus just strictly a numbers game and that kind of thing. I have a complicated relationship with doctors. I work with doctors. I'm a research coordinator and avoid/hate going to them because of how I'm sometimes treated. I briefly considered med school, but it was simply off the table. I was working 40 plus hours throughout school. I had good grades, but not perfect. The bigger issue was time doing other things to bolster the app. Hard to do with multiple part-time jobs and rent to pay. That's when like a holistic look at med school applications can be really helpful. And we could probably talk about this on another episode too, because it's like together. I did it on Knock Knock Eye, but it's, you know, how do you factor in someone who's like, just, you know, doing a part-time job? Maybe they're whatever they're doing, retail. Maybe they're a pizza delivery driver, but they have to because they have to pay rent. They're just gonna go into school.
Right.
But does that look good on a med school application? I think it should, but it probably doesn't.
Right.
And so how do you factor all that stuff in? So anyway, thank you for that comment. Full video episodes are up every week on our YouTube channel at Glock'em We also have a Patreon, lots of fun perks, hang out with other members of the Knock Knock High community, early ad-free episode access, interactive Q&A, live stream events, much more. Patreon.com/Glock'em or go to Glock'em.com. I'm so tired of saying Glock'em.
Hey, you brought it on yourself, so.
I just like, how many times have I said that damn word? Glock'em.
Yeah, you don't even like fully enunciate it anymore. It's just like.
It's Glock'em. Speaking of Patreon community perks, new member shout out to Randy T. Hi, Randy. Thanks for joining. And shout out to the Jonathans, as usual, Lucia C., Edward K., Marion W., Mr. Granddaddy, Caitlin C. Brown, L., MP. Cole, Tracy B., Mary H., Keith G., Parker, Muhammad L., David H., Kaylee A., Gabe, Gary M., Eric B., Marlene S., Scott M., Kelsey M., Dr. Hoover, Sean M., Ryan N., Jess K., Hawkeye M.D., Bubby Salt, and Shawnee D. Patreon roulette time. Random shout out to someone in the emergency medicine tier. Shout out to Susan F. for being a patron. Thank you, Susan. And thank you all for listening. We're your hosts, Will and Kristen Flannery, the Glock'em. Executive producers are Will Flannery, Kristen Flannery, Aaron Courtney, Rob Goldman, and Shanti Burke. Editor and engineer Stacey Portizo. Our music is by Omer Benz V. To learn about Knock Knock High's program discipline, ethics, policy, submission, verification, and licensing terms, and HIPAA release terms, go to Glock'em.com or reach out to us, knockknockhigh@human-content.com with questions, concerns, or those fun medical puns you have. Knock Knock High is a human content production.
Knock, knock, goodbye.
Thanks for watching the episode. You can find more on that playlist over there. If you prefer to listen or you just had your eyes dilated, you can binge full episodes wherever you get your podcasts. Or join the party over on Patreon, where you get early access episodes, hang out with us, get lots of exclusive bonus content. Help you subscribe, leave a comment below. Let us know what you think.